eating paper. I started eating good food, but never get a caker. I got a problem with the way I came up, but I don't hate the player. She spun around, touched the ground, then that pussy came up. So put them hits, baby. When the beat drop, do a little dip, baby. Even if the water's hot, take another sip, baby. Fucking with me, you get more than a tip, baby. Eyes closed, you won't ever see me slip, baby. When the beat drop, do a little dip, baby. Even if the water's hot, take another sip, baby. Fucking with me, you get more than a tip, baby. Eyes closed, you won't ever see me slip, baby. They know I got it. You heard it from the Bounce to the ounce. Put it in the air, make it count. Yeah, just make it count. Bounce to the ounce. Put it in the air, make it count. Yeah, just make it count. Bounce to the ounce. Put it in the air, make it count. Just make it count. Yeah. Bounce to the ounce. Put it in the air, make it count. Just make it count. Yeah. I don't text, I don't flex. I keep it grounded. My hope test what goes next. We work it out like Bo Flex, a swole chest. You hear the sound. Her glows next. I flows best. You slow it down. She lift weight, a straight face. Don't make a sound. A full plate. Don't hesitate. She'll put you down. I'm at the gate. She said, wait, I'm coming down. We hit skate. A move mate. She coming now. Scholar, baby, hear me. Roger, see me lately. Pushing harder. Ride it, baby. Take it. Father, ride it, baby. Take it. Father, push up like Daddy Dame got the hook up. You shook up, she felt the thing and made it look up. I'm booked up, you playing games for the shook up. She see her dance moves, look at where they took her. I got the flow to make her wanna change her name though. You got the dough, but she really wants you to change though. Deep and slow, take your time, girl, it's your game though. Hoes act differently in the presence of Dame, no. I keep a mood in the pocket for the game though. I let it change, now you watch it for the fame though. I watch her move, work it, mommy, do your thing though. Another blessing shooting down from the range though. Bounce, baby, work it, ride, bounce, baby, twerk, try. She see me fluent from the sky. Stay with me, this might be the night that I die. The flow is never stopping, little homie. Don't you try my body in the way so I know we can't see eye to eye. She said, Dame, I see how you got me mesmerized. You free your lame, integrity never jeopardized. Bounce.
What's going on, y'all? It's your boy DameSmiff, and this morning we're going to discuss the history of the music industry as it stands today, and as far as what are the advancements and different, I guess you can say, major shifts that have happened in the music industry. So if you are enjoying conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button. That way we can get more people to see this content, and also hit the subscribe button. That way you can also catch my latest streams. So like I said, today is going to be about learning about the history of the music industry, and most of it will be in the sense of, like I said, the advancements, and it's going to be important to understand it from the musician's perspective, because we can all say like, oh, I was there when there were cassette tapes. I remember Walkmans. I had an iPod, and that's all cool and dandy. But the real point I want to drive home here is that there's actually a lot of very important layered milestones that we need to address as far as appreciation for what we have access to today, but also understanding on how these things actually change, right? So what I mean by this is that there's a lot of times where, as fans and honestly musicians as well, they think that because they have a, let's say, popular song or really cool year or a nice career, that shapes the future for all other musicians, but that's not necessarily true. Like when Run DMC came out with My Adidas, that should have been one of the points where people can address the bridging of the gaps between a musician and a corporation that sells a product. When we seen Napster come along, we should have been able to bridge the gap between a musician and the ability to partner with a tech company to give an experience that is not real, like that's not existing, right? But what you'll see for most people when they have these conversations, it comes from this idea that there's some kind of I guess you can say, randomization. I mean, there's a bit of luck to everything, but the idea that going viral is random, the idea that influencing a mass group of people is random, changing a market is going to be random, or anything like that is just not true. And the point that's important to understand is that, or the reason that that's important to understand, is because you're going to be in a position to do something like that. You're going to be some kind of musician that maybe has the, I don't know, you could say the perspective that is needed to make a change, and it may stand against, let's say, your whole city. Maybe you're a small time AI, you know, artist enthusiast, but because your local town doesn't want a data center, it's really hard to advocate for that, but you know it is the type of change you want, right? Or the type of change your town may need. But in order for you to convey that, you have to know how that works. And sometimes you may not know how that works. So that's what we're going to explore. And we're going to see how a lot of times in this music industry, specifically in the US, they really had no clue what was coming, but it was more of an initiative to be first and also to be innovative. Innovation is something that we all crave. And we point it out when we say things like, why do all the rappers sound the same? Why do all the female artists look the same? And then why are all the movies remakes? So we clearly crave and value innovation. But when you look at history, the process of being innovative is usually punished. There's a quote I heard before, and I don't know where it came from, but they basically were saying there is no money in innovation. And what it essentially means is that if you know something like a drink named lemonade is going to make you millions of dollars, why would you reinvent lemonade, right? But then on the other hand, there's just a totally different philosophy where if you've never heard of something before, if you have no idea how to make it happen or what it is, pursuing that could put you in a position that's so unique that it has to be valuable because you're the only person that has access to it as far as exclusivity, or access to it as far as being able to teach others how to solve whatever problem you're solving. So there's two different philosophies there, and we're going to explore how perhaps yours may contend with history's results, or maybe go right in line with history's results. So let's get started. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at it from the obvious perspective, the one where we can all just kind of like face value, understand what's going on, and that is the corporations that function in the United States. And a lot of the corporations in the United States are actually connected, right? Many of you knew that, but we're going to kind of show you how they're connected. And because you know of something doesn't mean you really understand it, right? A lot of you know the ocean exists, but many people do not understand the ocean. So just keep that in mind as we go through this information and as we go through this timeline, because a lot of what you're going to see, hear, and experience through this is actually going to be either brand new to you, or it's going to shift your perspective in terms of what you expect from future artists, okay?
Hi, this is Matt Baker. Earlier this year, I did a video on the US TV and film industry, showing how various companies have merged over time. Well, today I'm going to do the same thing for the music industry, focusing on major record labels and how these two have been consolidated in recent decades. We're going to start up here with the invention of the gramophone by Emil Berliner in the late 1800s. Previous to this, Thomas Edison had invented the phonograph, but that was slightly different in that the phonograph used cylinders, whereas the gramophone used flat discs.
And we'll be kind of exploring this process as well, the inventions that come along to help us enjoy music and things like that.
Eventually known as records. Berliner's discs were easier to mass produce, so pretty soon the gramophone became the primary device used for playing music. Initially, the E. Berliner Gramophone Company was the only company to produce records, but because of weak patents, pretty soon other companies started making them as well.
Okay, this is the part of history that I wanted to show you here. So when people talk about the music industry and the history, they'll start naming people, right? They'll name like Michael Jackson did the thing, so now we do this. R. Kelly did the thing, so now we do this, right? Chris Brown did this once, so now we do this, right? Whoever you want to name. Taylor Swift did the thing, so now we all do the thing. But I want you to kind of highlight the opportunities that are within the music industry that you may not notice, that other people may have noticed, right? So even at the start of this, they said E. Berliner's Gramophone Company was the only company making gramophones. So that would be, if you wanted to parallel it, just like you being on TikTok going live. You're the only person that has access to this music from this person this way, right? Unless you're just a cover artist. Let's say you're an original artist, right? So that'd be you. But because of weak patent laws, do you see the other companies that can now make gramophones, right? And things like that, artists are usually not equipped to consider. Usually lawyers are, right? Patent lawyers, trademark lawyers, and things like that. But what had then happened was that legally you can do that. So patents, it says patents transferred to Victor Talking Machine Company in 1901, literally about 10 years later, right? And then also in 1901, Columbia Phonograph Company switches to disc records. So even Columbia Phonograph was making probably gramophones and things like that. But it also gave them leverage to then move into disc records. And then you see in other countries, even in the UK, they have a branch that went independent, Gramophone Company, HMV, in 1898. So what I'm highlighting here is that you could have a lock on something like a really, like I said, viral song, a cool summer hit or whatever. But the minute you really think that you're in control of that, that's where you can probably lose your footing, right? Because have you guys ever heard of E. Berliner's Gramophone Company? Now, I'm sure if you're an enthusiast of music and music technology, yes, you have, but the general public have not, right? And the reason I'm pointing that out is because there's this kind of, at least today that I've noticed, entitlement in that artists expect some kind of notoriety or respect for the works that they do from everyone. And that's not necessarily the case. And I bring this example up a lot where you'll see a violinist or cellist playing in the New York subway busking for like cash that's in your pockets, right? Many of you would walk past that person and say, wow, that song was great, but you gave them like, whatever's in your pocket. But that person probably spent a couple tens of thousands of dollars to go to school to learn what they're learning over the course of their career, right? So how do we justify what we're asking for from the music industry with what we are truly going to get? So what we're going to notice is this kind of trend over and over and over in the music industry is that you're going to see somebody kind of invent something and then everybody else exploit it, which is not wrong. It's just the process, right? And that exploitation part is usually used as a stigma in the music industry, but it's exactly what keeps the music industry healthy.
Their first big competitor was the Columbia Phonograph Company, which, as their name suggests, started out by selling phonograph cylinders, but then switched to gramophone records around 1901. Take note, however, that over time, the words phonograph and gramophone basically became synonymous, with both words eventually referring to record players. Because of lawsuits, Berliner was forced to close his original business in the US and transfer his assets to a new company called the Victor Talking Machine Company.
There's also that process in the United States where lawsuits, I'm not even sure the nature of the lawsuits and how they work, but being sued is a part of being in business, especially big business in America. And so when you consider that, you have to consider the cost. And so in the 1800s going into the early 1900s, it probably was pretty expensive for a company to, I don't know, again, don't know the nature of the lawsuits, but to be sued over and over again while being able to maintain the business, right? So this is the other part that the music industry tends to thrive on. And this is the sale and resale of rights and ownership and assets and things like that. This is another part of artistry, or this is another part that artists tend to be frustrated about because, again, we have sentimental value with our works. And a lot of our music comes with, I guess you can say, immeasurable effort. We call it sweat equity, right? A lot of hours aren't clocked. There's a lot of time and stresses and frustrations that are not considered for an artist in order for them to be successful by the general public. So things like, let's say, things going on at home, health issues and stuff like that, no one honestly is going to care when it comes to that part, right? So the only thing you really have as far as leverage when it comes to your personal life and trying to be an artist are assets. That's all you really have. Because if you think about all the musicians before you that are currently suffering from health issues, or let's say spousal issues or home issues, or maybe their kids or something, like anything's going on in their personal lives, the investment in that kind of thing really is not going to come from the fans. It's really going to come from within themselves and having had invested in themselves, right? So in order for e-billionaires to actually stay afloat, they would have to have been able to handle all of these lawsuits or the outcome of these lawsuits.
However, in the UK, he was able to carry on as the Gramophone company. Both firms ended up using the same logo, based on a now famous painting called His Master's Voice, featuring a dog named Nipper listening to a gramophone. In the UK, the Gramophone company opened stores called His Master's Voice, which was later simplified to HMV. To this day, HMV stores often feature the old logo with Nipper. Another very early record company, originally based out of Germany, was Parlophone. It's famous for being the label that the Beatles were initially associated with. You might assume that their logo represents the British pound symbol, but it's actually a stylized L, standing for Carl Lindstrom, the company's founder. In 1926, long before the Beatles were signed, Parlophone was actually bought by the UK branch of Columbia, which had become independent from the US branch just a few years earlier. But then in 1931, UK Columbia merged with UK Gramophone to become Electric and Musical Industries, better known as EMI.
So do you see how over time things are just moving around and things like that? And do you notice how there's very little to do with what artists' influence have? There's no musical expression needed. There's no music theory involved in this. This is just strictly business, right? And a lot of it really does have to do with the state of the politics at the time, the state of generally the music industry in terms of how fans are actually consuming music, seeing that they're going from electric and musical industries in 1931, it starts to kind of prove to you how valuable they see technology plays a role in the consumption of music. And so if we understand that, then this goes back to my conversation, I think 2 weeks ago, when we were seeing how they're introducing AI today into schools for musicians. There's an inherent stigma on AI on one hand, but then on the other hand, there's really an inevitable push for this kind of technology to be introduced to us because the fan base is actually the ones who are consuming music this way. That's why when we started this, I want to say at the top of May, there was a large conversation around, well, do people actually enjoy AI music? Do people actually care that people are making AI music when they hear it? And the answers we kept getting consistently was that if they can't tell, they don't care, right? And so we're getting to a point now where if we know in 2010s, in the early 2000s, producers and musicians were using loops and using pre-made, I guess you can say, automated sound kits and things like that without actually going in and playing an instrument, and we were accepting of that. It would be easy to think that today in 2026 and beyond that people would be completely okay with, let's say, AI generated backing tracks or AI generated piano chords or bass lines or even just general sound effects that are synthesized to fit into your song. So then if we can understand that and know that people will appreciate that on their own volition, meaning like as a fan, you just won't have a problem with it. You'll hear it on the radio and you'll bop your head and possibly come to the concert, right? Then why do we stigmatize it when it comes to applying it to our careers as artists, right? What is this fear that we think we're really up against when, if we take a look at history here, technology, just even in any form, has played a huge role in how people consume music and create music. That means like when you were making music for what we now call a record player, you had to consider the approach, right? You couldn't just play any kind of way, any kind of style. There's a certain lifestyle that came with owning a record player, playing a record player, and introducing somebody who's never used it before, right? Same with going with AI. So now you're seeing today where musicians are trying to navigate, well, how do I promote and market with AI? They're making AI album covers. They're trying to figure out how to implement artificial intelligence and things like marketing campaigns, having the AI speak for them in terms of creating a tone and creating some kind of communication channel. But at one hand, you have them trying to navigate it, but then in the other hand, you have artists rejecting it. And so I'm highlighting this to show you that these are the same issues that you would have seen in the 1800s. This exact same issue. There were probably a bunch of musicians trying to figure out, why would you make records? Why are you trying to record in the first place, right? And then when you get down to how much money record labels began making, then you will start to see the divide in the approach in making money in the music industry.
For the next 80 years, EMI would be the #1 record company in the UK, continuing to use the Columbia, Parlophone, and HMV labels. EMI's main competition there ended up being Decca, established in London in 1929. Take note, however, that Decca also started an American branch, which soon became independent. Which brings me back to the US. You see, in 1929, which is the year that Emil Berliner died, the Victor Talking Machine Company was bought by the Radio Corporation of America, or RCA, which also owned NBC. Meanwhile, about a decade later, NBC's main competitor, CBS, bought Columbia. So by the 1940s, America had 3 big record companies: RCA Victor, CBS Columbia, and US Decca. Now, before I continue, I want to shout out today's sponsor, Ground News, which is the website and app that I use to follow the news. Not just politics, but fun stuff too.
And so a lot of times when we're having these conversations, we'll be like, oh, the record labels. It's crazy how the record labels are treating artists and stuff like that. But then when I have conversations with people about how these actually work, this information is usually missing, and it usually is a problem for the artist, not the record label. So that's why we're really having this conversation, because I think that most people don't understand this.
And that's ground.news/charts. Okay, let's now return to the timeline of major record labels. We left off in the 1940s, when the US had just 3 main record companies: RCA Victor, home of big band conductor Glenn Miller; CBS Columbia, home of early teen idol Frank Sinatra; and Decca, home of actor, dancer, and singer Bing Crosby. Now, at this point, most records were made of shellac, which was very brittle and set to spin at 78 RPMs. But then in 1948, Columbia introduced the very first vinyl records, which spun at around 33 RPMs and were called LPs, or long plays.
How many of you have heard of an LP? And today, LPs and stuff like that aren't common, right? But the vocabulary and terminology has shifted because, like I said, for some reason, there's a weird disconnect between how people actually understand this history and how the terminology is properly used. And so when you hear LPs, EPs, and things like that, albums, even stuff like that, they have finite definitions, right? So today you'll have really honestly, it's not an intellectual conversation, but it's a conversation that if you just look it up, you will know the answer. But there's a real argument out there on what makes an album versus, let's say, a mixtape versus an EP and stuff like that. But these things are already defined. The problem is that technology has moved faster than we're able to, let's say, use the technology in a way or understand the technology. So like today we'll say a song on Spotify with 10 tracks, or an album with 10 tracks on it, makes up by definition an album on Spotify. But if you look up the definition of an album, there's actually certain length, a certain volume of tracks. There's certain length and volume of tracks when you think about LPs, EPs, and extended plays and things like that. But we put these names on there because we really don't have a standard for what they are, right? Especially with the new technology. So anything that would be like on a vinyl record LP could be considered a, album from a casual listener if you upload it onto Apple Music. So the conversations are very, very hard to have consistently especially when you start to have conversations with the artists themselves who don't understand this stuff. So you'll see an interview on The Breakfast Club or on one of these big old platforms, ASCAP foundations and stuff like that, and they will have the vocabulary all messed up, but it influences the conversation because now you don't really have to hold them accountable to being accurate. It's a weird thing to point out, but the reason I'm pointing it out is because as he's going to continue explaining this, you're going to find yourself confused maybe, or actually validated in what you may or may not know. And the reason you may be confused is because you may have thought an LP meant something else. You may have thought of an album to mean something else. Honestly, you may have thought a record company meant something else and things like that. Or you'll be validated because you knew of this information, but you weren't really sure and nobody's ever really confirmed it, right? And that's why I always point out too, before I continue, that a lot of the fans that listen to music aren't really involved in the music industry. Like, they're not pursuing this information to say, I need to know this because I need to know this. They're waiting for their favorite artist to expose this. Like when y'all see a singer playing a guitar, for some reason that's amazing to fans today. When that was like status quo in the 50s, that was status quo. But today you have so many musicians on your phones that can't play instruments, and you guys are okay with that. So when those same musicians start to speak for people like me, or even people way better than me, it really kind of muddies up the conversation as far as substance and what's really happening here. So we're going to just baby step our way all the way up to the point to where at least my audience is at least going to understand what it is they're talking about without trying to, prove anything. Like, you don't have to say, I know this stuff, or I have heard of this too. It's just to kind of understand that we're educating ourselves. Okay. That's really the point here.
Meaning that they could hold around 5 songs on each side. This was then followed in 1949 by RCA Victor introducing a new single format in vinyl that spun at 45 RPMs. This is why record players to this day usually have 3 settings, 33, 45, and 78, so that you can play all of these different types of records. Sometimes there's a 4th setting, 16, which is used for spoken word only. Anyhow, the introduction of vinyl and the LP kickstarted a new era of music, which I've labeled the vinyl era, in which musicians now release singles as well as full albums, which usually had around 10 songs. This coincided with the birth of rock and roll, the first really big star being, of course, Elvis Presley.
So before we move on, do you see how the language kind of flipped around there? So when he said an LP, the long play, it would have the ability to play 5 songs on both sides of the record. That's 10 total. Then he said an album would typically have 10 songs. So how would you define what it is that you're doing, right? Would it be the length of the time? Would it be, I don't know. What would happen then? Let me know.
Who was initially signed by a relatively minor label called Sun, but then later picked up by RCA Victor. In 1955, EMI, which remember was a British label, bought Capitol Records, making them their primary distributor in the US.
And you guys remember we went through Capitol Records and actually got a tour of their studio, and that was actually pretty cool. They have a video out that explores a lot of the different rooms and the historical context to a lot of the technology they use there as well.
Thus, by the 1960s, there were now 4 major record companies in the US. RCA, which eventually dropped the Victor name, Columbia, Capitol, and Decca. Columbia eventually became the top US label, thanks to artists like Bob Dylan and Johnny Cash, with number 2 being Capitol, which distributed the Beatles. Although, like I mentioned earlier, in the UK, the Beatles started out on EMI's Parlophone label. Later, they started their own label called Apple. There were lots of other labels, though, too many to list on this chart. But let me point out several other important ones that were founded during the vinyl era, starting with Atlantic Records, which originally focused on soul, launching the career of Aretha Franklin.
How many of you have heard these record labels with today's artists? You hear like rappers and stuff mentioning them. Sometimes you'll hear some R&B singers and stuff like that mention them, RCA and all this stuff. Now, how many of you actually connected to the artists themselves? Or have you known that these record companies have been out here for almost 3/4 of a century before them? So I'm pointing this out to say that there's actually a lot of rich history that comes with these record companies that we tend to dismiss when we talk about some of these newer artists and things like that. Like, in respects to understanding, let's say, a record deal, well, that would change shape. And we've seen that to change shape in our conversation about child prodigies and how, like, you can get signed on one deal, you got to have the Coogan Act and stuff like that. And then also how just definitions and vocabulary can change over time. So now when we consider that, and a newer artist is struggling with this, do you guys, this is the kind of controversial point here, is that do you guys consider that perhaps that newer artist doesn't understand the industry as well as perhaps, let's say, the record label? Meaning, are they able to leverage the talent they have, the product they have, the music they have properly, or were they expecting for Atlantic to work for them, if that makes sense, right? So I'll give you an example. Like, if you were in some kind of marriage or partnership or something like that, do you think it makes sense for you to kind of like wait for someone to do what's best for you, or do you think you should do what's best for you in cooperation with them? Right? Meaning, like, if you're going to release music under their record label, do you think it would make sense to focus on making really, really good music that makes them a lot of money so that way they can make a lot of money? Or do you think being signed to a record label is to make you a lot of money and make you happy and make you comfortable? So that's kind of what I've noticed with a lot of newer artists, is that disconnect right there is where they don't really understand how to leverage themselves, even if they are on stage. Like, I'll see people, we'll watch a fucking music video here and then people be on stage with hundreds of thousands of fans. I do it with Concerts Without Sound, and I can clearly see that this artist is struggling even with the popularity they have. But then when I can deep dive into certain other artists that are not as popular, you can see how they're thriving. But the ability for me to express that to fans is difficult because there's a sentimental value to how people feel about artists versus how they understand record companies to actually work.
Elektra Records, which launched The Doors, and Reprise Records, which was started by Frank Sinatra. All three of these were eventually bought by Warner Brothers Records, which, as you can probably guess, was started by the Warner Brothers Film Studio. Now, at this point, Warner Records became known as Warner Elektra Atlantic, or WEA. And
so when we were talking about selling catalogs, repurposing catalogs, can you imagine being a hit star on your record label only for your record label to merge with two other record labels? Can you imagine how much more competitive that would be now? Can you imagine how that deal would now be reconstructed, right? How that conversation now changes. So this is why when people talk about being in record companies and stuff like that, it's hard for me to listen to it because they're not really considering the corporate aspect, like how things actually move in corporate America, right? So on one hand, you can be an independent artist, start your own record label and own all your music and then have these same opportunities on your table. Or you can get signed and be under the mercy of whatever your leadership has to deal with, right? Because it's not really a right or wrong, like or dislike problem. It's a, does it make sense for the bottom line problem, right? And so when people are talking about partnerships and collaborating and trying to get on the same page with people, I don't understand how people consider being signed as some kind of leverage point when their idea of success is ownership. I don't understand it if you don't want ownership, but you want to control everything at the same time, right? And this is the controversial, I guess, parallel I see a lot of times with these conversations. So as you're going to see a lot of times, you're going to see the corporations and record companies merge and the technology companies come in and they play a role as well. You're going to see some of these record companies, sell or maybe, dissolve into other things like that. But what I want you to pay attention to is how much of the artist's influence plays a role in that. And in my opinion, it plays very little once you get past the bottom line. So with that being said, as we continue this conversation, like I said, pay attention to what I just said, but just consider that how you feel personally about being on the same page with, let's say, a company in regards to the term bottom line. Like, what is your bottom line? What is their bottom line? What is the point of the partnership and things like that, right? And if you can't really figure out how that's coming together once you see all these movements happen on this chart here, then we can explain it later. But I think the issue is that you got to know whether or not you know this.
It went on to become the 5th major record company in the US, representing big names such as Led Zeppelin and the Eagles. Now, during the 1970s, there also ended up being a 6th major company, Polygram. So let me go back a bit and tell you where it came from. Back in 1913, a German company launched a label called Polydor. Then, during World War I, it acquired the German branch of Berliner's Gramophone Company, which incidentally allowed it to use the His Master's Voice logo in Germany. Eventually, the whole thing was bought by the German conglomerate Siemens. Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the Dutch conglomerate Philips started its own record label. It then bought Mercury Records in the US and rebranded as Phonogram. So you had Polydor in Germany and Phonogram in the Netherlands. These two companies started to work together in the 60s and joined officially in the 70s to create Polygram. Poly from Polydor and gram from Phonogram. Okay, before we leave the vinyl era, I want to point out a few more important independent labels, such as Island Records, which distributed Bob Marley, A&M Records, which launched The Carpenters, and Motown, which was founded by Berry Gordy, whose family tree I've covered on this channel.
So a lot of times when you hear about independent record labels, do you guys assume, I mean, honestly, what are the assumptions you make when you hear independent record labels? The thing when I was hearing about independent record labels and independent artists was that there was too much, I guess you can say, volatility in how they performed and how consistent they could be. So you would want, let's say, like Motown, they've locked in basically on how to solidify a sound in Detroit and stuff like that. But then if you consider Capitol Records and RCA and stuff like that, they have a variety of artists. So trying to do something like that seems more difficult, right? So then you have a situation where in terms of a market, it's actually more valuable to have a variety of music. But if you're able to lock in on that one thing or that kind of like style, like Island Records, then you can really figure out how to create a lane for yourself. And that's where you have to battle with innovation and replication, because Capitol Records and all these other companies, you can see them working together and splitting up and merging and things like that because they're trying to replicate something that they've done before. None of them are saying, you know what, we're going to go over here and do our own thing and just pay the cost to be the boss. They're not doing that, but Motown did. So
Motown was really important in that it was the first African American-owned label to become super popular with white audiences, coinciding with the civil rights era in the US. It launched lots of famous artists such as Marvin Gaye, Diana Ross, Stevie Wonder, and the Jackson 5. Now, the reason why I show these three labels together is because they were all eventually bought by Polygram. All right, we've now made it to the 1980s, which is when the vinyl era came to an end. This was due to the rise of the cassette tape, which ended up surpassing vinyl in terms of sales around the year 1985. But the reason why we don't have a cassette tape era is because cassettes were surpassed within less than a decade by compact discs.
So what we're seeing here is what we were calling the exponential growth of technology. So the cassette tape was only surpassing vinyls by sales. And that's really what caused everybody to say we need to start making cassettes. And then as soon as CDs surpassed cassette tapes, everybody moved to CDs. Now, I want you to think about this, where at the exact same time this was happening, and like you said, within one decade, you had artists like the Beatles, Aretha Franklin, Led Zeppelin, and things like that having to navigate all of this. They had to navigate teaching you what a cassette tape is because your parents taught you what a record player was or the radio, right? And then at the same time, we also had to teach you the value of the cassette tape lifestyle, owning cassette tapes, collecting cassette tapes, going to the record store and buying cassette tapes. How do you read the packaging? What is the packaging and stuff like that? What is cool packaging? And then within a decade, those same artists had to figure out how to navigate CDs. We had to teach you what CDs were. We had to get you acclimated to using CDs, whether in the car, outside the car, within your home radio. And then at the same time, teach you how to take care of the technology. Again, with no music, no singing or anything like that. That technology changed everything, and then within a decade was surpassed yet again. And then we're going to see it happen again and again and again. And so what I'm showing you is that when this started to happen, not only did the artists have to navigate this, but so did the record labels. And if you were thinking like a record label from this point on here, then you're like expecting so many shifts, because you're going to see how one record company could take advantage of cassette tapes because they embraced it, just like how some record companies are embracing AI today. And then you can see how another record company doesn't do as well because they won't embrace the new technology, similar to how some record companies and artists will not embrace AI today. But when we play the numbers game, how many of you, at least in the audience, consider the numbers to be valuable, or valuable enough to make your entire trajectory change, basically, to now sell your company, or maybe merge with a tech company, or maybe shift your branding and things like that? Because we've seen it happen in the vinyl era over and over and over again. But when we have the conversation in person, there's, like I said, this weird delusion that you guys want to own and be in control of everything, but at the same time not embrace the changes that come along with owning and being responsible for everything.
CDs. Now, during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there continued to be 6 big record companies, but in several cases, there were some big changes in terms of ownership. So let me now go through the big 6 again and tell you what happened. Warner Elektra Atlantic continued to be really successful in the 80s, representing artists such as Madonna and Metallica. And then, as we learned in the TV and film episode in 1991, Warner became Time Warner, at the time the biggest media conglomerate in the world. But one thing I didn't mention in that video was Time Warner's disastrous merger with the internet company AOL, which led to its decline. One of the results of that decline was that the music side of the business was sold. And thus, from 2004 onwards, Warner Music has been totally separate from Warner Entertainment, even though they still share the same name.
And do you see all the companies that are within the Warner Music Group? So when we say WMG, Universal Music Group, and stuff like that, do you see how many record companies are within here? Meaning how many artists are in here competing, right? So this is where we're going to start to actually see shape in why I have the perspective of the music industry as I do, which doesn't normally go in line with the common perspective of the music industry, right? I don't see this as a bad thing. I see this as competition, right? Many artists will look at this and say, oh no, they're monopolizing, or they're taking all the resources and stuff like that. But what I see is they're offering clearly a deal you guys will not turn down. Because this would be foolish of me to think that everybody who's in these record labels are doing it against their will, in bad contracts, or don't enjoy their circumstance right now. So then rewind back to when I have conversations about how fans and artists feel like they deserve more in the streaming royalty rate, the pro rata pool, and how many fans and artists feel like they need more leverage when it comes to their representation on social media, and they don't like how the paparazzi has a bunch of involvement in their lifestyles. Well, this bleeds kind of into how you are actually viewed in general, right? If your record label views you as an extreme asset, they'll invest into you. But if you're independent, then you are the record label. And I think when we start to see that, fans have to come up with some kind of logic gap where they have to say, okay, I really, really like this person's music, but I'm not going to put my time, effort, and money into investing into their future because I don't see them as an asset for my life. Which is why I explain to artists a lot of times, you need to be involved in your social groups, in your society, and in your town, outside of just being on TikTok and on live all the time, right? Because if these people don't see you as an investment, you won't be treated as an investment. It sounds very simple, but it's something that for some reason doesn't click, right? So with that being understood, it becomes kind of cold and callous to approach that as an artist, right? And this is where artists try to navigate this. Oh, I'm relatable. They try to act poor, or they want to be really, really degenerate to kind of relate to the common folk. But in reality, they're trying to elevate their lifestyle through music. And so what you're going to start to see is that with these music groups and with these record labels, they actually do have an agenda as far as just being in business, right? But the conversation they're going to tell us in general is, as far as brand communication, is that there's some authenticity to the creativity that's coming out of this, right? And it's very hard to navigate if you can't tell that the artist that's on stage right now with all these lights and stuff like that is doing this to encourage sales, not because of sales, right? This is not ROI that you're seeing on stage. This is investment that you're seeing. This is capital being placed into the artist to get you to buy the record when it drops. This is not, I'm doing very well and this is how my show looks. So even as I explain it this way, for many fans, it's probably not even clicking yet, because you're thinking, well, if I pay for a concert ticket and the artist comes out and they play the music and they go home and they count their money, they should be in the black, right? They should be making a profit. But when you pay attention to things like the Lil Wayne situation, the Taylor Swift situation, the Prince situation, clearly that's not true. You guys can be right there screaming your freaking faces off in front of these people. There's a lot of music videos out, Megan Thee Stallion's going on tours and stuff like that. But then when you break down the numbers and who's actually running the money, you guys aren't making the connection. And so that's the part that we're going to have to really highlight here. So like I said, when we see these music groups and stuff like that, I don't necessarily see anything wrong with what they're doing because they're offering a deal that people want. It's just that I think the conversation has to be clear when we're saying that the representation of an artist is not of the artist, it's of the record company, okay? Because artists are not having conversations about royalty rates and things like that until they get signed, until they go viral and stuff like that. So you're not going to see your favorite rapper doing what I'm doing today, because they really don't see the value in doing it today without the influence of investment.
Warner Music now uses this logo, whereas Warner Entertainment still uses the original Warner Brothers logo. Now, Warner Brothers was not the only film studio to start its own record label. Columbia Pictures started one as well in 1974, called Arista Records. It launched Whitney Houston, but soon thereafter, Arista was bought by a German company called Bertelsmann, which continued to record her music. Now, earlier I mentioned that RCA was not only the owners of a record company, but also of NBC, by now a major TV network. Well, in 1986, when RCA was bought by General Electric, the new owners decided to keep the TV channel, but ditch the record company. At this point, Bertelsmann bought RCA and formed BMG, which stands for Bertelsmann Music Group.
So you see how all of those catalogs and all those artists like Whitney Houston and all that just got shifted to just a German record company. Now, this is the point that I'm trying to make here, is that the influence that those artists had, because you guys really loved Whitney Houston at the time, did not matter to these mergers. The only part that mattered was the bottom line that these artists brought. And it's something that, again, I say a lot of artists struggle with because they don't go into the industry understanding this. That's why I always implore you guys to ask yourself, what do I want from the music industry, right? So if I were involved in any of these record companies, I'd be looking for equity, just off the strength of making the record company do well, and then off the strength of, if this company does move or merge, I get some kind of value out of this versus them just selling my catalog to the highest bidder. It is what it is. But I'm also an artist that is willing to just own all of my music at the same time. So I'm willing to just own it all and leverage it with my own control versus allowing the record label to do so. So it is what it is.
BMG went on to buy Jive Records, the home of Britney Spears and NSYNC, and thus ended up having a massive catalog of artists, both.
And the massive catalog of artists that they're talking about, again, as fans, when you guys see the new commercials come out, the Disney music, and when you hear their music played in movies and stuff like that, you as fans in general do not consider where that money is landing because it's not really privy to you, right? But your support of these artists is what's driving the decisions behind these mergers and things like that. So if you guys just hated Britney Spears and never played her music, that catalog of music wouldn't have been valuable or part of the conversation when they were deciding to buy Jive Records, because it's not valuable. But because you guys have a almost unwavering love for certain artists, and this is why I point out that as an artist, it's eerie to see, but when you become an artist and you actually compete in these algorithms, it's eerie to see how you'll know somebody in person and the most that they'll consider your music is a couple streams. Like, you can have all the links and all the content and things like that, and the most that they will consider is a couple streams on, let's say, a playlist that they'll add you on. But then when you look at something like, let's say, Nelly or 50 Cent or Ludacris or some Britney Spears or something like that, they will have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of plays of not even all of the music in their catalog, just the one or two songs that they love from this artist. So the investment in that person tangibly goes to a person they don't know and they have never met. But the person that they know in person, they will not invest that much, right? And it's weird to see, because you would think that for most people it would kind of click, but no, this actually transcends even the music industry. You'll see people do it with food. Like, how many of you shop at grocery stores that are major chains versus the local mom and pop shops and farms, right? Some of those local mom and pop shops and farms, you know those people, but your support is invested somewhere else. So that way the investment that any of these mom and pop shops would be getting as far as success is missed, is not counted, right? And so this is frustrating for a lot of musicians when I have this conversation, because they'll then realize the competition they're up against is usually why we call it a machine, right? It's a machine, meaning if we take a young female artist today, put her in the gym for 2 years, and then put her in like the fanciest clothes, and then take a bunch of pictures, and then have her record her music, record a bunch of music videos and stuff like that, and we put it in everyone's face for the next 3 summers, it's almost undeniable that you guys would know that name, whether you like her or not, right? And that's what we call a machine, right? And so with that, trying to do that on your own, you would still have to do this in terms of like a salesman through relationships. So whereas the machine, where we'll use an example like a major artist, like a Ludacris or something like that, you never have to shake the hand of Ludacris. You never have to meet this person. He don't have to convince you of anything. You don't even need to know that he flicks boogers when you're not looking, right? You don't care, right? You don't care at all. But the minute you know that the local rapper down the street got a DUI, suddenly they're not as valuable anymore, right? Or maybe the local rapper or major rapper even has something going on in their personal life. The level of investment you're giving to them is now in question. And so, because we know this in the music industry, we don't bank on artists at all. We don't look at artists and think like, oh, your song is doing great, you're probably going to be able to do this again. Because the odds of you working as hard as a Prince, the odds of you working as hard as a Michael Jackson is extremely low, because of how people have been trained musically today. Like, a lot of you don't even know how to play instruments, right? But because record labels know this today, and especially with the record executives that have been in the game since the 60s, they know the level of skill it takes to actually pull this off. Whereas younger artists, as I'm trying to explain here, may not. It is very easy to take advantage of somebody's influence or virality today and leverage that versus their actual talent, right? Because the virality is going to be so much more valuable for the fans, because they get a lot of content. They can have their own content. This is where you get the bootlegger economy, where all of you guys want to start making live streams and reactions and reviews and all kinds of stuff to music, or gossip culture, where you want to find out what Britney Spears ate for lunch instead of what she's working on in the studio. You want to know who Offset's having sex with instead of figuring out what he's writing in his next album. So all of this stuff creates an economy that the record companies can now thrive off of. You can now see situations where the tech companies will see this as well, and they'll offer things like the Megan Thee Stallion Snapchat filter or something like that. It's just a little hottie tongue that flashes or something. I don't know what it could be, right? But these little partnerships only exist because they know for a fact that they're banking on your influence that comes from how you feel about these artists, never about these artists' musical talent. The music is just a vehicle, which is why a lot of the music that you guys, at least what you say to me, sucks. Like, you guys are like, why do all the rappers sound the same? Where's all the new music and the good R&B? Bring the good R&B back. Well, the machine has proven through data that you guys don't appreciate valuable music. You guys appreciate valuable experiences, valuable memories, and things like that. So what's more memorable than Tekashi 6ix9ine? You know, what's more memorable than the biggest butt on an R&B singer, right? What's more memorable than the rapper who really does his crimes, right? And so once we figure out these little machines and things like that, we just start making products. And the point I'm saying all of this for is so that you guys can now say, oh, okay, I know somebody who's close to me that raps, or I know somebody that makes music, or I know somebody that plays an instrument. What do I want to see from them? And how much of an investment am I willing to make in them? And it's a conversation most of you are not going to have, because this is something like going to the grocery store and actually like reading the back of the label. Like most people don't even do that, right? So I'm basically saying, read the nutritional facts of your artist and figure out how much of that you want to invest into if you actually care about the success of their career, because the record companies can sign them and then just sell them away. It will not matter, right? So if you care about the person and you want to say, oh, I want this person to be successful, or I want this group to be successful, then you invest in them. That is also why, before I wrap this up, we looked at groupie culture. Groupie culture was a part of that as well. Bootlegging culture was a part of that as well, because there was some kind of honor system there, right? Clearly, groupies weren't getting any equity in the investment they were putting in, but the idea of what they brought was valuable to the artist, that of which was transactional. It made a relationship for them, right? They would get backstage access. They would get probably cooler, quote unquote, memories and experiences that most people will not get, that of which we value so much today, but we can't pay for at all because of the inflation of the prices and things like that. So groupies were super valuable, just how fans are super valuable. But today, fans and groupies are so far disconnected through the technology and as well as the culture of actually investing in musicians. It's really difficult for y'all to get that through.
Old and new. Next up is Columbia, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the #1 record company in the US throughout the vinyl era. Well, during the 1980s, it kept this #1 spot, thanks to being the home of Michael Jackson. Although take note that Jackson actually used one of their subsidiary labels, Epic Records. Now remember, Columbia Records was owned by the TV network CBS. Well, around the same time that NBC parted ways with RCA Records, CBS parted ways with Columbia Records, selling their entire music business to the Japanese conglomerate Sony, who, as we learned in the TV and film episode, also bought Columbia Pictures.
So do you see how all these catalogs and all these investments start to shift and change and things like that, right? So if you didn't know this stuff and you went into the music industry, I can see it being frustrated where you would work with an executive or an A&R executive for like 7 years and you guys build a relationship, only for behind the scenes, they would then merge with another company and now your A&R is Japanese, or your A&R is a Japanese liaison who speaks English, you know, and things like that. It's very interesting and could be frustrating for some people, but the point here is that you're also not the one in control. You leveraged away your rights as musicians, and so you now have to work with the corporations and the things that come with it. The best thing you can do in this situation is to try to get leverage and get equity. Usually artists, like even when you see with Prince, they can't do it because the concept has to be designed in the beginning, right? Ownership has to be designed in the beginning. And you'll see a lot of these record companies avoiding artists that own a lot of their catalogs for this very reason. You can't control it. And you want to be able to control it because the idea of why they're buying records and why they're signing artists has little to do with you being a good musician. It has more so to do with the value you have with selling records.
So, to this day, Columbia Records and Columbia Pictures are now owned by the same company. But then, in 2008, Sony also bought BMG, giving Sony Music 4 major labels: Columbia, RCA, Arista, and Epic.
So you see to the left, we have Warner Music Group, and then now we have Sony Music, which has RCA, Columbia, and Arista, and Epic. Now, as we start to break this down, you'll see this exact same business model and this kind of like umbrella happen with or smaller record labels, right? I was going to say independent, but really they're just smaller. So you have things like Young Money, Cash Money, Young Money, and all that stuff like that. You'll have Dreamville, you have all these different TDEs and stuff like that, and they all have little tiny little labels underneath them, right? Gang members in hip hop, they do this a lot. They'll have like a East Coast Blood record label, and then a West Coast Blood record label, and all this crazy stuff, right? You go down to Florida, you got all these like Hispanic record labels, Cuban record labels. You go up north, you got Puerto Rican record labels. You go out west, you got Mexican record labels. It's all kinds of record labels. And so what you'll then see is that they'll kind of like consolidate on a style, right? They'll call themselves West Coast artists or something like that, or we're down south artists. And then you'll see them kind of like develop some kind of interstate circle or circuit where they can all make the same similar music, right? Gospel music is terrible with this too. They do this a lot. What's the other one that Southern Soul, I think it's called now. That's the new genre of music that's coming out where you're starting to hear a lot of the artists kind of just emulate the same thing. So record labels are paying attention to how you guys are moving the needle and what numbers are moving around. But do you see how much more control they had over the time just through strategic mergers and purchases of different companies and catalogs, right? So now at this point, Sony and Warner Music Group have the biggest and probably the best catalogs to contend with. And then here we come along as musicians with YouTube channels and TikTok accounts trying to act like we're going to go so viral that we're going to compete with any of these artists. And we hated this so much when we started to see this in real time with like Drake collaborations. People were like, why is Drake collaborating with everyone, and then the people he collaborated with don't do anything with it? Well, the real reason behind that is that the record companies that are investing in Drake put way more investment in him than probably other record companies do in their own artists. And then also the fans that like Drake don't necessarily need a reason to like Drake. So I'll give you an example. If you go to a bank and you have $25 in your bank account and you need 40, when you pull out the cash, or if you go to the ATM and you try to pull out the cash, there's a withdrawal fee, right? There's a bank ATM fee that comes with what you're drawing the money out of, right? Most people are willing to just take that hit. And what that looks like is most people are willing to just play a random artist song just so they can hear Drake. They'll take that hit of just playing this song they may or may not like because they know Drake is on it or that feature is on it, right? And so as a record company, and even as an artist who is within a record company, looking at that as a business model, that is actually very valuable, because then that means that not only can I make this leveraged moment for you as an artist, but also that means I can just kind of, or my brand sells itself in a way. Like I can just place myself in certain areas that I appreciate, whether it's a style of music where you'll see Drake doing all these different genres of music that people were acting like they didn't like. And then suddenly he just would stop it, because then it just brings the attention, the real estate over to where they are, which creates leverage for those artists. But what you'll then see is that many of those artists can't take advantage of that because their fans are not as invested as Drake's fans are. Drake's fans clearly will follow him from genre to genre, follow him from feature to feature, album to album. But then the people he features with, those people's fans are nowhere near as invested. And that's kind of the point I'm showing you of this chart here, is that the idea that you listening to your artist on streaming sites without actually investing into your artists is foolish to think as valuable as, let's say, actually being a groupie, as actually being a part of the experience that they have there. And so you will eventually get priced out of what a fan actually is. But it all has really little to do with how the artist is moving and how they feel. It has more so to do with how the artist is set up their business, right? Because you guys will clearly go on a TikTok live and listen to some girls sing. But as far as putting down $100,000 in terms of merchandise, I don't think you guys are going to do that, especially as a collective, unless that artist has proven themselves to you. You'll see many artists turn to commercials, sponsorships, and things like that. And in my mind, I'm like, that's not smart, but it's the only option they have because their fan base is not investing in them,
among many others. We're now going to skip past Capital EMI for a moment and go straight to US DECA. which in 1952 acquired Universal Pictures, a fact that will become important in a moment. But first, you need to know that in 1962, Decca, which now included Universal, was bought by MCA, which stands for Music Corporation of America. Initially, MCA continued to use the Decca label, but then rebranded as MCA Records in 1972. Their biggest star at that time was Elton John. However, it was during the 90s that MCA, which eventually rebranded itself again, this time as Universal Music Group, really started to grow, swallowing up all sorts of independent labels, as well as one really big one. First off, there was Geffen Records, which launched Guns N' Roses, and Interscope, which distributed major rappers such as Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and Tupac.
So do you see how even with these mergers happening, they're not only targeting major record labels, they're targeting independent record labels. And so when you see even these three artists right here, Tupac, Snoop, and Dr. Dre, they still have Death Row Records. And then it looks like the chart eventually merges Republic and Def Jam into this catalog pool here, which then creates all of the musicians I'll be talking about, where you guys open your cell phone and you see on Apple Music, all those names are like, ooh, do you like this artist? Do you like this artist? Well, those artists are connected to record labels that have partnerships with these tech companies. Remember, we were talking about that a month ago, where record companies are now partnering with tech companies to create experiences for the fans that are usually unique at first, but going to kind of shape how we generally look at the consumption of music, right? So just keep that in mind as we go through this, where the control of these catalogs is not dictated by the artists.
But then in 1998, Universal bought all of Polygram, which, remember, came with Motown, Island, and a bunch of other labels, including a newer one called Def Jam, whose very first artist was LL Cool J. So with the merger of Universal and Polygram, Universal was now the biggest record company in the world, as well as, of course, a major film studio. However, in the same year that Warner Pictures and Warner Music split up, so did Universal Pictures and Universal Music. Universal Pictures was bought by General Electric and combined with NBC, whereas Universal Music continued on as a totally separate entity.
So, do you guys see what's happening here, right? It started off with the phonograph, the gramophone, and things kind of just moved forward and forward because it got easier and easier to sell records, right? And the idea of a record today is completely different because now they're just called streams. They're not even like records. They're just MP3 files and stuff like that. So now that we've seen all of this layout here, the understanding of the music industry should be a little more clear, but you should also be able to understand how to navigate this, right? You could get signed to an independent record label and then wind up merged into UMG. It is what it is, right? And so when we see our favorite legacy acts taking the longest time ever to put out music, how much of that do you think is considered for their fan base? Or how much of this is considered for their fan base when we're looking at, let's say, the contracts that they first signed, or having to renegotiate contracts or wait for certain contracts to run its course for negotiation? Because if I were Universal Music Group, when they started merging in all these different groups and I seen Sony Music happen and Warner Music happen and stuff like that, the way I would be setting up contracts is that, all right, if this merger happens again, or if we have to split this up, I would have enough cushion room to make money off of your music until I figure out what's going to benefit me, right? So that's why I personally think you see even LL Cool J is not putting out a dump load of music like he could be, considering a Larry June or a Currency who are independent, right? So these are just the things that I think most fans don't consider. And these are things that most artists don't explain because it kind of shows a weakness in a way. As cool as we think a lot of these artists are, and like I said, they be on stage and they have the bright lights and stuff like that, and it looks amazing, and you guys think they're doing really well because they win, let's say, a Grammy or a BET award or something like that. I don't see it the same way. I just don't. And so now that we're explaining who's actually in control of these things and what's actually influencing the flow of money when we're talking record sales, we start to actually see why so many successful artists are on tour consistently all the time and nonstop. But then we're also seeing why we're also not seeing the volume of music we could be getting from our legacy acts when we are considering, let's say, the access that they have to all of this, technology and resources, and of course the ability to easily make music with AI and stuff like that. So make sure you guys check out that video. That's from Useful Charts. They got like 2 million subscribers. Really, really cool channel. But in terms of this conversation, we're going to deep dive a little bit further into the United States and understanding how this is all going to affect American artists going forward. So let's get to it.
In this video, we're going to leave Europe behind and take a trip over to the United States of America. Over the last 150 years or so, music from the United States has kind of come to dominate music around the world. It's amazing, even if you travel to very far and distant countries, if you turn on a radio, chances are you might hear a piece of American rock or pop music. We're going to pick up this story in about 1870. This is a really important time in the history of America, as the country is just coming out of its Civil War. After a long struggle, African American slaves have been freed, and slavery across the whole country has been outlawed. So a lot of people think that the reason why so much exciting music came out from about this period onwards was because for the first time in the history of mankind, you had people from all different parts of the world and all different backgrounds starting to mingle together. And just as the same ways their cultures and religions and even cooking might have started merging and coming together in different ways, so too did the sorts of music that they were singing and playing. So if you were to go to somewhere like New Orleans in the southern states of America in around 1875, what kinds of people would you expect to meet? Firstly, the town would be filled with newly freed former slaves. These people brought with them a huge amount of musical heritage, going right back to their roots on the African continent. In addition, it's likely that they would have known a large number of what were called work songs that would be sung whilst out working through the plantations in the southern states of America.
And as we go through this video, also consider how songwriting is structured during this time, and then also remember that there are actually things that are considered, I guess you can say, valuable by record companies with these kinds of songs. So when you see the church hymns that we sing today, a lot of those church hymns that we sing weren't actually songs at first. They were just poems. Like you would just have the lyrics, and then you would have to get a musician to come along and actually understand music theory and put music to the words and then play them for the churches and actually learn how to write these songs so that they would be complete. And then over time, learning how to write music became structured. It became a style. So then America actually developed its own style of writing.
Work songs were generally easy to identify because they used what is called a call and response pattern to the music. There would generally be a leader who would sing a melody line. Then everyone else who was out working in the field that day would sing a response back. Performing music in this way was one way to pass the time whilst undertaking what was ultimately inhumane and backbreaking work. Once they were free from the oppression of slavery, African Americans were free to develop this music in new and exciting ways. While it wasn't possible to take musical instruments out into the plantation field, in the years that followed the end of the American Civil War, black musicians started learning instruments and developed accompaniments to these work song pieces. Over time, this new form of vocal and instrumental music became known as the blues, and more specifically in this part of the world, the Delta blues, named after the delta of the Mississippi River. Typically, unlike the work songs which required a large group of people to perform this call and response pattern of musical phrases, the blues can often be performed with a very small group of people, and even, perhaps, one singer, accompanying himself on the guitar. Perhaps the most important thing to remember when looking at this early blues music, and in fact all of the music that had come from the black community, is that it wasn't written down. It wasn't a notated music form, which means that you couldn't go and look up this music on a score and learn how to play it that way. You had to learn how to play this music by having experienced it and having someone teach you it directly.
And that is what made music itself so valuable before we were able to record it. Like if you think about Beethoven or even the lute players of our time and things like that, and choral singers in like the cathedrals of Catholicism and things like that, being able to hear that, again, going back to record labels valuing experiences, being able to hear that made it almost a once in a lifetime experience, meaning there was no live streaming the performance to your phone, let alone your living room. You had to get up, get dressed, go to work, save money to be able to travel with your family to see these people perform. So then when you did that and you got there and it was a, let's say, a choir of 300 people singing for Jesus, you will almost never forget that experience. And you can't capture that in any other way. So then when you introduce the phonogram and the gramophone, it basically created a way for musicians to capture those moments and put it in your home, and fast forward to the cassette and CD to the MP3 right in the palm of your hand. So the reason we had to explore this in this linear fashion is because today we're super acceptable of, I guess, what I would call microwave music, where you're okay with somebody just turning on TikTok live and just singing. But the ability to see somebody sing like that, sing very well, is technically watered down by their own decisions. It's nothing you've done wrong. That's why I said it's really hard to bridge this gap of a conversation, right? So think of it this way. You learned blues music because you probably had some older musician teach you how to play music, right? Back in this time. And then at the same time, in order for you to get good at it, you had to practice. There was no AI, there were no loops, no digital audio workstation, there was no YouTube tutorials, and there probably weren't even schools designed to teach you music at that efficiency. So then by the time you did get good, however long it took you, however hard, difficult journey it was, right? Do you think it would be a choice for these musicians to then say, well, I'm only going to do this, let's say, for free on a platform. Like I'm just going to go down the street and just do it for free. Or do you think for them, there's a sentimental value for the time it took, the experiences they went through to learn these things? And so I'm highlighting it this way because he's explaining the history, but the context of the history really does lay the foundation for what we value. The trope and the joke that R&B music is only good because the singer is in pain plays a role here. The trope that hip hop artists have to actually be criminals in order to talk about how tough they are plays a role here. But we're aligning it here with the historical context of the United States because this is a consistent thing that you will see with musicians worldwide. When you think about most music you get from cultures like India, a lot of the songs that they have come from actual stories. They're not just songs they make for dancing in the club. When you think about songs that come from, let's say, Russia, Germany, even Western Europe and things like that, they usually come from very life-changing moments like war, famine, and things like that. So considering this, how much value would you put on an artist if you knew that they were a master at blues or a master at orchestral singing and things like that, or singing hymns? How much value do you put on that, right? And I'm tying it to the historical context of the United States because usually like I said, the source of this music comes from an event that actually happened to everyone. But today we don't apply that because most of the music we appreciate comes from, like I said, with Ludacris and Drake, it comes from people we can't relate to, people we never met, and people we cannot care about. And we will do that directly over people we know in our personal lives. So it's an interesting, very, very, I guess you can say, provocative conversation to have with fans and musicians, because then you will have to face the reality of what your experiences are as a musician and then actually deliver that to your fans. instead of asking your fans, well, what do you want? And then giving it to them. It's very, very interesting of a conversation to have.
One of the common features of music that's like this, music that is what we call an oral tradition, is that often we don't have set pieces of music in the same way that we often think of Western classical music. Instead, improvisation is a really important part of the way the music is performed, and also the way that it develops. While some people have argued that a huge amount of American music is based on the foundations developed by the early blues musicians, to fully understand how we get to jazz, rock, and pop music, we also need to understand the other people who were contributing their own musical cultures and heritage to the melting pot that was America at the turn of the 19th to 20th century. The European immigrant population in the United States comprised of people who came from pretty much every country throughout the European continent. These people brought with them a wealth of musical tradition and heritage, much of which we've spoken about in this series already. So in cities like New Orleans at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, black musicians with their emerging styles of blues music were living and working side by side with white musicians who might have been playing at opera houses or performing concerts around the city. In this kind of environment, it's not long before musicians start to borrow elements from each other's musical traditions to start exploring and developing new musical styles. Many of these new styles that begin emerging in the southern parts of the United States in the first decades of the 20th century are what we now call jazz music. While jazz music uses a huge amount of material taken from the blues, like the focus on improvisation and the relatively simple forms and structures, it also starts to explore more advanced harmonies and playing techniques that are taken from other styles of music, most notably Western classical music. During this time, we start to see the emergence of jazz players who have an incredible technique on their instrument. Take a look at Louis Armstrong, for example. He had a technique that was a rival to most of the classical trumpet players of his day. There's a huge amount of music which is full of exciting experimentation and exploration, which we know as jazz music, and I hope in the future to cover this very, very interesting area with a video series of its own. However, while jazz continues to develop throughout the 20th century, other musicians come along who want to make use of the exciting new developments in electronic musical instruments to produce some different sounding music. While a large amount of jazz music has focused on wind and brass instruments like the clarinet, the trumpet, and the saxophone, rock and roll, this new exciting emerging style of music that we start to see from the 1940s and 50s, is totally focused around the electric guitar. To fill a dance hall or large auditorium with sound, a jazz musician might have to bring up to 30 musicians along with him to make up a band in order to fill the space with sound.
And so when I hear people talk about jazz sometimes, most people, it's not a style of music that they just immediately gravitate towards, because when you are usually taught music, it comes from, especially for children, it's very structured. It's not something that's just, a creative, innovative experience for children most times. And so when you think about people who are trying to learn instruments, it's very structured. So going to school for jazz can be kind of a struggle for many people, because understanding the ability to move throughout rules or breaking rules on purpose is kind of counterintuitive logically, right? So what you'll then see is that the smaller ensembles, like I said, if you were able to see a Louis Armstrong like in person and like see him play, that's one thing, right? But if you want to hear his piece and you paid for a ticket in like a 200 person amphitheater, well, to get that exact experience, you would have to write, right? As a jazz musician, as a jazz ensemble, you'd have to write, because now you'd have to basically get all these musicians on the same page to project larger sound, right? That's just one aspect of it. The other side of it is, what if you needed to get this experience of Louis Armstrong to Germany? How do you do that? And you would have to write. You'd have to write or record. Writing would help the musicians that are there be able to play the music, as long as they can understand, the English and the approach. But then at the same time, if you want the audience to hear it, most audience members don't know how to play instruments. They can't read music. And like I keep telling you guys, are not willing to invest in the music industry to know this stuff. So you have to record it. And so the struggles for being a jazz musician were limited by technology in a lot of ways because of how we consumed music. So the appreciation for jazz really went to those who were invested in it. And with it being such a historical, valuable genre of music to this particular country, it does value, or it does mean that the people who enjoy music in general that are Americans, it would behoove you to understand this, right? It would behoove you to at least know what this is, whether you like it or not, because it does set the foundation for everything that comes after it. So whereas people who would look at saxophone players and they would be like, I don't prefer jazz music, or I wish jazz had like a bigger impact, you could see them moving towards electronic music because of the amplifications of speakers, amplifications of the synthesizers that have come, and then of course the electric guitar and stuff like that, right? You can see how that works. Fast forward to today, where you're watching like orchestral films, you have artists like A.R. Rahman, you have Tamil movies and things like that, where they have like all these instrumentalists in one spot playing extremely loud and intricate music to get the to convey the message of an artist or a writer. That's very, very, very hard to pull off in the 50s and 60s, and it's very expensive too. So what technology did is it made it easier, similar to AI and Suno today. But the problem that artists are going to have is satisfying your, I guess you can say, appetite for a musical experience and a musical immersion, and then also satisfying that actual true musicianship that it takes to create something.
But quickly, rock and roll musicians realised that they could make just the same amount of sound with an amplified guitar, a singer using a microphone to amplify his voice, an electric bass player, and a drum kit player. So quickly, the sizes of ensembles that we start to see playing to large groups of people around the country begin to get smaller. Rock and roll musicians also introduced another very important development into their music. While jazz musicians tended to favour longer open structures because these were good for improvisation and it allowed them a good amount of time to develop their musical ideas, rock and roll musicians started to focus their musical compositions down to only a couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4 minutes at the most. That made these compositions absolutely perfect candidates to be recorded onto a 7-inch record. These records would allow approximately 3 to 4 minutes of music to be recorded on each side. Anything longer than that would have to be split up. The relative ease with which people were able to record and reproduce all of this music meant that music stars like Elvis Presley became hugely famous the world over, and started what we might see as the modern period of American music history, that's still kind of going on today. During this period, the large record companies realized there was a huge market to be had from selling new and innovative music to young people. Another reason why this new emerging rock and roll music was incredibly popular was it was ultimately very simple. Record companies quickly discovered that they could sell far more copies of this simple, direct rock and roll music than they could of the more complex, sophisticated jazz music that was being produced at the same time. So driven by this huge desire to always be producing something new, we see a massive range of new musical styles and ideas emerging during the following decades, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s, if you like. While these new styles often sound very different from one another, under the surface, the sorts of forms and structures that the musicians use in the music is actually very similar to those set up by the early rock and roll musicians.
So how many of you understand this structure? Now, when I see this structure, I think of this as like a cheeseburger. This is the cheeseburger of songwriting right here. And like you said, it comes from rock and roll, but it's really just a structure. Like, it's just something you can do. It's like if you were designing a car and you just told me it had 4 doors, 4 tires, an engine, and 4 seats. That's what this is right here, right? But then we start getting into spoilers and you know, iridescent paint, and then we get into like the kind of brakes and the kind of, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. Like when you start getting into things like that, that changes this conversation a lot. But the reason I'm highlighting this is because for music fans, this is not meant to be felt. You're not really supposed to even be aware of this structure. you're supposed to hear a song and just hear like the twinkles of a glockenspiel or some bells and twinkles for the intro, and then some soft pianissimo singing and some breathy, airy tones and voices and vocalizations come in. And then when the verse happens, you're supposed to be so immersed by that point where you don't even realize it's the verse, right? And then when the chorus happens, the chorus is, especially when you think about major record labels, the chorus is supposed to be so impactful that you immediately are sold and like, wow, what is this song? I need to know what this is. Or such a catchy hook that you're already singing along, right? And then when we get back to the verse, you just are craving for more and more and more. And then we give you the chorus yet again, only to give you the middle 8, which is to kind of really highlight the musical creativity here, or to really just keep you hooked. And then a solo usually is not here today in 2026. You guys are not musically inclined enough to care about a solo, let alone the artists are not musically inclined enough to play a solo. So that's not even a thing today, honestly. And then we'll do the chorus 2 more times and then be out. And that'll be like a 2.5 minute song today, because the verses are done so fast and usually in double time, especially when you're thinking about pop music, that by the time you get to those bottom 2 choruses or an outro, it's probably about a 3-minute song, right? So doing that and you not being able to feel it or like notice this makes it very easy for us to get like multiple streams going. You'll see, and I hate it so much, but it is a thing. Like, you guys like when other artists sound alike, so it makes it easy for DJs to make mixes. Your Spotify playlists sound like one big old song instead of like amalgamation of music and things like that. So it's the thing you guys like to do. And so what record companies have figured out is that if we structure our songs a certain way consistently over and over and over again, we can get a consistent, at least predictable, consistent result out of your experiences.
Until recently, things had carried on reasonably well, with record companies doing very well out of selling the music of a range of musicians working in different styles. Some people might have criticised them and said that the range of music they produced was too narrow and aired always towards the simpler end of music, because that's the sort of music that people really enjoy listening to. And other more sophisticated music, like classical and jazz music, gets less attention than perhaps it should. But ultimately, we've been very lucky to have a great flow of new and exciting music for the last 40 years or so, coming from the basis of the fact that we can go and buy recordings of new music at our local record shop. But if we look to the high streets of the UK, the USA and other countries around the world, we see far fewer of the record stores that we were used to seeing only a handful of years ago. That's because the introduction of internet technology has completely shaken up the way that people are able to exchange music. Previously, to get hold of a new exciting recording, you'd have to go to the record shop and buy it. Whereas now, there are far more ways of getting hold of this. Some are legal, like the Apple iTunes Store, and some are illegal, with computer users sharing musical files between each other. So it's very interesting that I'm making this video on American musical history at this exact point in time, because it's definitely certain that this history has come to a very important point. Yet no one's quite sure how the future of music will continue. It's certainly true that we can now get access to a much wider range of music than was ever possible before. But what it does mean is that musicians are finding it increasingly hard to make money out of the sale of their recorded music. Personally, I hope that the result that internet technology will have on the music industry is that we'll return to a much simpler time that existed before recording became a mainstream way of distributing music. There is no more exciting experience than sitting in a concert or standing at a gig and seeing your favourite band or artist perform for you live. It's certainly becoming the case that to make a living as a musician, you're going to spend your entire life on the road. But this isn't a new thing at all. This is exactly what the travelling musicians in the 15th and 16th centuries did right the way across Renaissance Europe. They would move from place to place, singing their songs and telling their stories. And I hope that's exactly what we'll see in the future. We'll be able to find a fantastic array of music that can be ranging from very simple to incredibly complex and sophisticated, whatever suits our taste. And hopefully these musicians will be able to find a large enough audience to support the work that they do.
And that point there at the end is really what this video is about, is being able to find a large enough audience to support what you're doing, because like I said, a lot of fans, when you have a conversation with them about like what's your favorite artist and what do you like and stuff like that, they really think they're supporting by doing what the record labels have offered them the ability to do, which is just to essentially getting access to a subscription service. And you don't really own any music. You don't really like these cassettes and things like that. It helped you develop a collection, and the merchandise allows you to get an experience. But nowadays, most of your fans aren't doing that. Most of my fans aren't doing that. Like most people's fans are not investing in the artist. They're investing in themselves. And the idea of investing in themselves usually comes from basically having Apple Music on their phone. That's pretty much about it. So let's get into our next topic here. And we're actually going to figure out, why are so many artists moving down to Nashville? What is down in Nashville?
Signs of Nashville's explosive growth are visible from the city's skyline.
There are cranes everywhere. It's booming.
Nashville is known for its country music scene and boasts the largest concentration of music industry jobs per capita in the US. But the secret to the city's success goes beyond music.
150,000 new jobs, $30 billion growth in our GDP, and we're tracking on that.
More than 2 million people and 60,000 businesses call the Nashville area home. The city boasts the 5th hottest real estate market in the country and a thriving job market. Dozens of publicly traded companies have offices here, and more are moving in. Amazon and Oracle are investing hundreds of millions of dollars, creating thousands of new jobs.
There was a gravitational pull to the city.
People want to come to be a part of this train, this fast-moving, exciting train.
Yet rapid growth usually comes with its own set of challenges, like a lack of affordable housing or strong infrastructure. The question is, can Nashville get there?
I'm willing to bet on Nashville.
It's not our job to take more out of Nashville. It's our job to make Nashville bigger.
So he's an artist that actually gets it. If you really think about what he said there, it's not their job to just get more out of Nashville. And I try to say that a lot when it comes to the music industry. Like a lot of people, when they're investing into, let's say, a city, or even like if you just get a job, like if you just get a job somewhere, most of you are going to work for what you think that little hourly rate is that you negotiated for. But what you really should be focusing on is, I mean, honestly, if you care or not, is trying to get the most out of your talent, not the most out of your job, right? So let's say if you're really, really good as a musician, and let's say you're into, I want to say, songwriting, you're a really good songwriter, and you moved out to Nashville. Do you think it would be wise to think that Nashville is going to pay you handsomely for your skill, or do you think it'd be wise to think that you bring a lot of value to Nashville?
To take more out of Nashville. It's our job to make Nashville bigger.
Take a walk through downtown Nashville, and you'll quickly learn how it got the nickname Music City. It's widely known as the country music capital of the world, and the music industry there is valued at over $10 billion. It even helped jumpstart two of the industry's highest-grossing superstars.
It's infused in everything that we do throughout the city. We would have growth, but we wouldn't have this tremendous trajectory that we've been on.
20 years ago, Ivy and other business leaders helped officially brand Nashville as Music City. But to drive real success, Ivy says it needed to be much more than a tagline.
The entire city has embraced the Music City brand.
From live performances at the airport, to hotels where you can sleep in guitar-shaped beds, or have a Gibson delivered to your room. Ivy believes the rallying call around Music City for the past 2 decades created the foundation for a sprawling tourism economy worth $27 million annually.
So when we were talking about DC yesterday, we were talking about the 250th birthday. And the idea of tourism being valuable to musicians is just a constant phenomena, right? That's just been a thing since forever. But now you get to kind of see how this entire town or city pretty much gets to take advantage of musician culture and bring so much value in all other aspects of their society, right? So this is a good example of what could happen in your city if you guys were to take advantage of the skill sets that are available to you guys. But like I said, for most artists, the struggle you're going to have is being in control of this. Do you think this would work if Nashville sold country music to other states? Like if they, instead of trying to make Nashville the spot, do you think this would work for Nashville if they exploited country music in, let's say, a transactional way versus an ownership and authority figure kind of position?
The city has a beautiful way of taking someone who's not from here and making them feel like they belong here. Doors open at certain times and you're the lucky one that gets to walk in them.
Brooks is the biggest selling solo artist of all time in the US.
A dreamer's best friend is this city. It's proven it to me 1,000 times. So anything that Garth Brooks does that brings one more penny to this city than it would have without Garth Brooks is still going to never even get close to what the city has given me.
The city boasts the largest vinyl pressing business in North America. It's part of a nearly $11 million investment into vinyl. The $2 billion industry is projected to top $4 billion by 2030. Swift pressed her entire catalog here. Nashville's Music Foundation helped bring in other entertainment. Less than 30 years ago, this building, the Bridgestone Arena, didn't even exist, and the city didn't have any professional sports teams. Today, Nashville is transformed with the $155 million stadium in the heart of downtown, a new $2.1 billion domed football stadium on the way, and 3 major league franchises. 2 former governors helped drive this sports boom: Phil Bredesen, who brought football and hockey, and Bill Haslam, who bought NHL team the Nashville Predators for a reported $880 million. And in 2025, he put in a bid to bring a WNBA expansion team to the city as well.
For cities to grow and thrive, I think you need thriving downtowns, and Phil gets a lot of the credit. This arena was built when a lot of people said, well, nothing's happening downtown, why would you do that? And he stuck out his neck and got this arena built as mayor. Well, I'm bullish on sports in this city. I can't see the future of sports being anything except positive around here.
So how many of you would look at something like this and think this is a waste of money? Because that's exactly what he was explaining here. He was like, if nothing's going on in downtown, why would you build a stadium? Well, what they're realizing, and at least what they're able to visualize as businessmen, and this is the part that record companies were able to figure out over artists all these years, is that they realize that if they can create unforgettable experiences, meaning like we have our own sports team, we have our own culture of music, our own culture of food, our own culture of people and men and women and fun and, you know, entertainment, then the value there in owning that is almost something you could never give up, right? So similar to record labels, they figured, well, if we could own the phonograph, the vinyls, records, and then we can own the catalogs of the artists, then we will essentially own the experiences. And so that's what they've basically figured out right here. And so yesterday, when we were talking about the 250th birthday of the United States, that once in a lifetime experience is what everybody's banking on right now. So when we talk about investing, this is what they're deciding to do with their city. They're saying, in order to make this city more valuable, we're going to invest in more of the experiences you get from visiting and living here. Similar to a musician, where you would invest in the performance you would have on stage, or maybe the listening experience of your album or your record, that of which is super important to the fan, which would bring them coming back for more and more, right? So let's say they did this same thinking, but they were slow to move on it. Let's say they used this same thinking, but they decided to be frugal and not go for 880 million, but they wanted just 8 million, right? So when we talk about investing, the concept of a waste of money usually comes because you don't believe in the investment. That's why that is an existing opinion. So let's say you have, again, your friend that you know right now, or your homie or your bro, and they write music right now, and they're on YouTube and they have Spotify channel and all that stuff right now. Would it be a waste of money for you to invest in them, or would you see that as something that's going to be worth the experiences that come with that? Now, the only way you're really going to know that is based on the results that they are willing to provide, right? So if they spent all this money and then for some reason everybody in Nashville decided to just spray graffiti on everything, then that would have been a waste of money. But the honor system is that you should understand what you are investing in to prove whether or not the money you're putting into it is a waste or not. It's not up to what you're investing in to do that, because it's your money. It's your, like, as taxpayers, it's their money to figure out, we want a Bridgestone Stadium, right? So when they get the Bridgestone Stadium, use it, utilize it, exploit it, get all the money you can, sell the brandings and get all the, use the space, get all the shows and the things like that. And at the same time, take care of the people that take care of it, right? So these governors and things like that, they actually play a huge role in facilitating this process. Is the reality of the situation, right? So they're going to make a lot of money, but you can also make a lot of money if you participate in the investments here. And that's why people love businessmen and women, and they love trying to get rich at the same time doing it.
To do that, and he stuck out his neck and got this arena built as mayor. Well, I'm bullish on sports in this city. I can't see the future of sports being anything except positive around here.
Its biggest by far, generates $67 billion annually. 16 public healthcare companies are headquartered in the area. And there's a thriving healthcare startup community too.
So 10 years ago, there were probably 3 firms investing in venture capital in Nashville, and they only did maybe 50% in healthcare. And now there are about 22 to 25 venture firms just in the last really 8 years that have come to Nashville.
The healthcare boom started 50 years ago when Frist's dad, brother, and Jack Massey, the owner of KFC, started one of the nation's largest for-profit hospital chains in Nashville back in 1968. Now there are thousands of healthcare businesses supporting nearly 168,000 jobs.
It starts with a cluster. By human nature, people want to come to a city where there are other people being trained, where entrepreneurship is valued, and then other people want to come to be a part of this fast-moving, exciting train.
In addition to talent, major investments are fueling rapid tech expansion too. The number of tech jobs grew by 17% between 2017 and 2022. Amazon opened a $230 million East Coast operations hub there in 2018, and it has leased over 1 million square feet of office space downtown as it expands its footprint.
So what he was saying about people finding value in the city and wanting to come into the city is a key thing. It's about creating that experience and that immersion that they want, right? So when you see cities like Seattle and what they're going through, New York and what they're going through, Florida, when they had all their insurance, home insurance, people leave Florida and things like that is a sign to businessmen and women on where they're going to start moving their money. Now, as musicians and artists and stuff like that, you can be up and up on this if you pay attention to the companies that are moving around, right? One of the cool things that I was talking about was how the French horn that I had was manufactured in Indiana, but the factory couldn't stay up there, so now they moved to Texas. So things like that are just realities of just the country that you live in, right? Just the government and the businesses that are going on. It's all about the bottom line.
We found that we could find the talent here. We also found Tennessee and the city to be very business friendly and policies that support our business growth. So when you find that, you want to double down on that.
Software company Oracle is also expanding there, developing a massive $1.4 billion campus for its global headquarters. 2 key reasons it chose Nashville were no state income tax and a great quality of life for its employees. And it gave the city an additional $175 million for infrastructure.
Their idea is we want our employees to bike to work, to hike to work, to kayak to work, pick however you get to work, but be within a very tight 15-minute radius.
As part of the Oracle deal, the state approved a $65 million grant to offset some of those moving costs, and that half of the company's future property taxes would be reimbursed for that upfront infrastructure investment. Nashville has been recruiting other corporate giants too, thanks to a 10-year strategy that gets updated every decade called Partnership 2000, that the city created in 1990 to lure businesses to the area.
When we can recruit a headquarters to Nashville, it has an impact beyond just the business activity in the community. It affects philanthropy, it affects brain power, and we want that business to be supportive of balancing our economy.
Over 600,000 jobs have been created, yet there's still work to be done. Nashville's growth has fueled the strongest real estate boom the city has ever seen. local homebuilder John Eldridge says he's just trying to keep up.
We don't currently have any houses that are built, completed, that are for sale that haven't been sold.
He started building Nashville homes 15 years ago, smack in the middle of the Great Recession. But in just a few years, the market suddenly took off, thanks to an influx of buyers looking for a more affordable market. Single-family home construction permits jumped nearly 25% in 2015 from the prior year, 3 times what was going on nationally.
It's not just the economics, it's our climate here, it's our culture here, it's our location. I mean, we're within 500 miles of about 2/3 of the population of the United States.
The schools and small city were big draws for native New Yorker Madison Cartulero.
I knew that I would want something with like a lot of other younger people and a more like livelier nightlife scene, and I knew that Nashville would offer that to me.
Nashville's
So a lot of times when you see these conversations, right, they always talk about jobs. But you got to think, if you're an entrepreneur, your job kind of like makes itself in a way. Like you should be able to see all the opportunities in this just because of I guess you can say the potential of all the new technology and businesses that are showing up there and all the new problems that they're going to have to deal with that you could potentially solve. That's where the job part comes into play. Like her coming down from New York to Nashville because she wants a younger, livelier nightlife scene is a consumer mindset. And so as an entrepreneur, the way I can take advantage of that is to be in the venues that have the nightlife scene that she wants and then provide the music that the town has. You know, like I can see the value in the skills that I offer there. So that's why this is always going to be an interesting thing to pay attention to, because this city doing this growth and things like that kind of parallels the same thing that we've seen with the record labels merging and then buying and selling catalogs and things like that. They're able to create sports teams. They're able to bring large companies like Amazon over, bring Oracle over, and then be able to develop housing and things like that for all the new people that come in and things like that. So just consider that with the competition of, let's say, the small businesses that have been in Nashville forever and maybe stigmatize new change and new technology and stuff like that. So this is a very, very interesting way to look at history, but also to apply it in real time on how things are actually going to move quickly and exponentially, but you need to be a part of the train, like he said, but you also have to be investing into the moments that will be history making, right? So that's all I have for you today. We're about to push the 2-hour mark, so I don't want to keep you here forever, and we can get you guys off for lunch and things like that. But I will see you guys in the next episode. This was the history of the music industry, especially in the United States, and